Hi, folks, and welcome to First Bite, Fed, Fun, and Functional, a speech therapy podcast sponsored by SpeechTherapyPD.com. I am your host on this nerd venture, Michelle Dawson, MS, CCC, SLP, CLC, the All Things Peds SLP. I am a colleague in the trenches of home health early intervention right there with you. I run my own private practice, Heartwood Speech Therapy, here in Coletown, South Carolina, and I guest lecture nationwide on best practices for early intervention for the medically complex and fragile child. First Bite's mission is short and sweet, to bring light, hope, knowledge, and joy to the pediatric clinician, parent, or advocate.
By way of a nerdy conversation, so there's plenty of laughter too.
In this podcast, we cover everything from AAC to breastfeeding,
Ethics on how to run a private practice,
pediatric dysphagia to clinical supervision,
and all other topics in the world of pediatric speech pathology. Our goal is to bring evidence-based practice straight to you by interviewing subject matter experts.
to break down the communication barriers so that we can access the knowledge of their fields.
Or, as a close friend says, to build the bridge.
By bringing other professionals and experts in our field together, we hope to spark advocacy, joy, and passion for continuing to grow and advance care for our little ones.
Every fourth episode, I join in. I'm Erin Forward, MSP, CCC, SLP, the Yankee by way of Rochester, New York transplant who actually inspired this journey. I bring a different perspective, that of a newish clinician with experience in early intervention, pediatric acute care, and nonprofit pediatric outpatient settings.
So sit back, relax, and watch out for all our squirrels and enjoy this geeky gig brought to you by SpeechTherapyPD.com. Hey, this is Michelle Dawson, and I need to update my disclosure statements. So my non-financial disclosures. I actively volunteer with Feeding Matters, National Foundation of Swallowing Disorders, NFOSD, Dysphagia Outreach Project, DOP. I am a former treasurer with the Council of State Association Presidents, CSAP, a past president of the South Carolina Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, SCISHA, a current Board of Trustees member with the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia, and I am a current member of ASHA SIG 13, SCISHA, the Speech Language Hearing Association of Virginia, SHAV, a member of the National Black Speech Language Hearing Association in Basel, and Dysphagia Research Society, DRS. My financial disclosures include receiving compensation for First Bite podcast from SpeechTherapyPD.com, as well as from additional webinars and for webinars associated with Understanding Dysphagia, which is also a podcast with SpeechTherapyPD.com. And I currently receive a salary from the University of South Carolina in my work as adjunct professor and student services coordinator, and I receive royalties from the sale of my book, Chasing the Swallow: Truth, Science, and Hope for Pediatric Feeding and Swallowing Disorders, as well as compensation for the CEUs associated with it from SpeechTherapyPD.com. So those are my current disclosure statements. Thanks, guys.
Hi, this is Erin Forward, and these are my disclosure statements. I receive a salary from Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. I receive royalties from Speech Therapy PD for my work with First Bite Podcast and other presentations. I also receive payment for sales from the First Bite Boutique, which I have with Michelle Dawson. For non-financial disclosures, I am a member of ASHA and a member of Special Interest Group 13. I also am a volunteer for Feeding Matters. I am a contributor for the book Chasing the Swallow with Michelle Dawson, which I receive no financial gain. I also am a member of the South Carolina Coalition Committee with ICDL-DIF full-time.
The views and opinions expressed in today's podcast do not reflect the organizations associated with the speakers and are their views and opinions. Hello, welcome to another episode of First Bite. Today, I'm excited. I have Brooke Nutting on today, and she is a fierce parent advocate that I followed and
have continued to love what she shares on her Instagram about her advocacy for her son, Caden, who's autistic. And she also has her master's in counseling. So I think the lens that she shares through is very multifaceted and comes from a lot of her experiences, which is why I wanted to have her on today, because I think I always say that I am the clinician that I am because of what I know, but mostly because of the families and the children that I have learned from. And I learn from every family and child that I feel so lucky to have them open up their world and their life and be vulnerable with me, which I don't think I try to really sit back and remember the privilege that that is to be able to learn from these families. And so I am grateful for the caregivers that share their story, that open up to clinicians and other caregivers and people that can learn from them, because we have so much to learn. And just like I always say too, every autistic advocates are always really great at saying, I'm one person with autism, I'm one autistic person. I think we need to do a better job as clinicians of realizing I'm one clinician with one experience, and I always have more to learn. So I'm really excited to have you on, Brooke. I have a lot of questions for you, but I would love for you to give people a little background on you, on your story, whatever you would like to share with our First Bite listeners.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was such a nice introduction. It's been a long time since I've been in the professional world. It's been 6 years since I had to leave my full-time career. So it's kind of nice to hear what you had to say. But yeah, so a little of my story is that I had always wanted to be a child therapist from the time I was about 13 on. And I got to that role and I was a licensed therapist, and my kids just called me home. Caden is 4.5 and he has an older sister who's about to be 7. So I've pretty much been home with my kids since my daughter was about 9 months old. I was a military wife at the time. And then we started after the post-military, we moved a couple times, and there was never an opportunity for me to kind of go back to the profession. But we had Caden in 2019, and I would say, I'm really thankful for my background because I could tell pretty early on that Caden wasn't hitting certain developmental milestones. He hit a lot of physical gross motor milestones, but other ones. And so I had to really advocate for even an evaluation. At 18 months, our pediatricians said all the classic things you hear about. He doesn't look like a kid that's autistic. Why'd you answer the MChat this way? He's just a COVID kid. Like, it was one of those things you just like think doesn't actually happen, but yeah. But we got him a diagnosis before the age of 2, and my husband's a federal employee. So we were able to use his medical diagnosis to ask the government to let us come home. And we've now are back in my home state with more supports. But yeah, when I was a mental health therapist, I was first a mobile therapist with kids and adolescents in and out of homes. I was also a little bit in outpatient setting. And I also worked in a psychiatric hospital. So I have, a vast range. And I wish I could go back to my former self and just, advocate for those kids in the hospital. Because I look back and think about how many kids were hospitalized that really should not have been and were probably autistic. And I didn't know at that time. So yeah, that's kind of my journey. And Caden, now he's 4.5. And I feel like I've had to be his advocate since that 18-month-old setup. I was really lucky to work under someone who kind of was ahead in her time. She was a mental health therapist with kids, and she didn't want to take the ABA approach. And so when I realized my son was autistic, I had that background and I started listening to autistic advocates. And so we've never done ABA, but I'll talk to you if you want to a little bit about why we might be considering just finding help if you want to. But yeah, so that's kind of my story over the past 4.5, 6 to 7 years.
I do have one random question. Did you take work with Dr. Iverson at all?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. She's a professor at Pitt. She's like a
Oh,
developmental psychologist, and I'm like obsessed with her research, which is when you
yeah.
know I'm really nerdy because I like
Yeah.
have an obsession with researchers. No, I think I would love to get in. I would love to, I mean, we dive into, have conversations about ABA
Hmm.
and, what that looks like. And if people that listen to this podcast know I'm not a proponent of
Hmm.
ABA, but I do understand that ABA provides support
Hmm.
for time of the day that caregivers can't get anywhere else.
Yeah.
I do not fault any caregiver from getting ABA because some really need that support.
Yeah. And we should tell the listeners, we both went to University of Pittsburgh, and that's probably
Yes.
you
Yes,
asked
that's
me
why I
that
asked it. Thank you. I'm the podcaster and I'm not giving any background. We both went to University of Pittsburgh, so I knew that she was
Yeah.
there.
That's hilarious. But yeah, that's one of the things I really wanted to talk about was back in my old role, getting parents support was like my biggest role. And I think that's a part of speech, occupational, physical therapy, the EI world that is really lacking. Like
Mhm.
we had a therapist just 2 weeks ago kind of stare at me, you're going to need more support, but no like guidance of where I'm going to get that. I'm like,
Mhm.
I like moved my whole family back home to be around family, to have more support. But that's not every day, like our
Right.
parents can't come help us every day.
Right.
So yeah, where am I going to find that?
Mhm.
That's not helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I would also love to hear, when you started to notice some of those differences that
Mm,
Kaden had, what was because I think, and I was listening to the Rare Life podcast the other day with Serena from PlaySpark. And, I think especially caregivers that are such advocates like yourself, I can imagine there's this pull back and forth of like, I love my child. I support him in all of his differences, but I also didn't wish that life was harder for him.
mm. I've been struggling with that a lot lately. If anyone follows, I think it's A Day in Your Shoes or in A Day in Our Shoes. She's a
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvania parent IEP advocate, and she's been opening up about that a lot lately. Her son has a lot of needs and disabilities. So she's kind of saying like all those autistic advocates that can speak for themselves and think, well, her son can think for himself. So I apologize, I shouldn't say that, but communicate for themselves should
Right.
not be speaking for my son because I don't think that my son would wish this pain that he experiences upon himself. So Caden, he was just, I don't know how to describe it. We used to just say like, you're so funny.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the biggest things were those imitation skills. So our story is not one where my kid was talking and then something happened and he didn't talk anymore. He wasn't talking. He always babbled and he still does a lot of sounds, but he wouldn't high five or wheels on the bus. Like we could sing over and over and he's not imitating those motions. Play Spark, Serena just did a really cute let's go in the car, whatever.
Uh-huh.
Like there was no car at the end. So we did all those things and that just wasn't happening. So those were really the first things. He didn't respond to his name, didn't wave hello, didn't high five. But it was also COVID. So we weren't really around people. So yeah, at 18 months, that's when I brought it up. But I think about Caden and I always say he lives a joy-filled life. And
Mm-hmm.
my goal is that I will never let anyone take that joy from him. I honestly think he's so happy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I have the same experience yet of the woman from A Day in Your Shoes. He is so happy, and I think it's because I've really protected him from harms.
Mm-hmm.
Um, his body sometimes does feel uncomfortable in this world, but we figure it out and we like move on quickly. and I'm constantly advocating for accommodations for him, and I'm accommodating him at home. Like, this is probably controversial, but I don't give him baths. He doesn't like baths. So,
Mhm.
autistic adults said, you know what, I don't like baths either. And I use those medical grade wipes to bathe
Yeah.
myself. And I
Yeah.
was like, heck, if these adults say that they don't have to take a bath, my son doesn't have to take a bath. And in the summer, we can just make it like, oh, we're
Right.
pool play out in the backyard. But in the
Yeah.
winter, we can just wipe down. He hasn't hit puberty, and we'll figure that goal out later,
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
things like that.
I love that too. I had a caregiver say to me, I work with her child and he's just adult language processor. He
Mhm.
is so creative and so fun. Like his favorite thing right now is we're going on a bear hunt. And so he'll
Mhm.
change different things that we're going on a bear hunt in his scripts. And, she was asking me, she's like, he wakes up and he goes right to, we're going on a bear hunt, or do you like apples? Is his other favorite song. And we have this conversation all the time where she goes, I want him to experience as much joy as possible. And I don't want to take his joy from him. But I also want to make sure that I'm not like, sometimes it's hard for her to navigate. Is this the joy that he's feeling, or is this I'm ruminating on something because I'm anxious? And so she has a
Mhm.
difficult time, I think. But that's a constant struggle, I think, for this caregiver in that way. She's like, I want to make sure I'm providing this safe space for him to feel as joyful, but sometimes because he has these differences, it's hard for me to always know
Yeah.
where that's coming from.
And I think if we take it from, again, I'm always in this like mental health lens. My daughter is neurotypical and she ruminates on a lot of thoughts. And what do
Mm-hmm.
I do with her? I just affirm those thoughts. And just like you and so many other SLPs are such advocates for, repeat those scripts back to them and affirm them in that way.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing your best. Our kids, whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent, are going to have a hard time at different points in their day throughout all of their lives. What we can do the most is just to be there and validate, right? And so
Yeah.
if I'm just going to
Yeah.
sing going on a bear hunt until maybe that thought is over, my daughter has been afraid of fires for 3 years, like, and that thought's not away yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
going to take time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think relationship then becomes such a key part of that because that is so regulating. So the more, maybe if we're using something like that because of the anxiety that we're feeling, the more relationship we can put in there, the safer we can feel. And I am pretty open. So my brother, he's not diagnosed autistic, but we've had a lot of conversations as a family. And my sister even called him one day and she goes, Reese, do you think you're autistic? And he's like, I've thought about it, but diagnosed with ADHD when he was younger. And I remember, and I tell this story a lot because I apologized to my mom. I think at this point it was like 6 years ago or so. I said to her, I was like, Mom, I'm so sorry because I remember being older and feeling like my mom, and I even said, like, was babying him.
Mm,
And she just knew he needed more support. Like she
yeah.
just, as a mom, he didn't have that diagnosis, but she knew. And I remember, when he went to college, she would sign him up for all his courses. And I was like, Mom, he has to do it himself. And then I learned about autistic inertia, and I was like, oh, it's a great thing she signed him up for those courses. But I think me, my sister, and my brother were so different, had such different needs.
Yeah.
And I can imagine as a caregiver balancing supporting your neurotypical child and your autistic child has to be challenging just because the needs are so different.
Yeah. They are very different. I think this is where the conversation recently of a therapist staring me down, like, you're going to need more support, came to play. And, I've been exploring that. We've had a weekly babysitter 1 night a week, since for a while. My husband
Mm-hmm.
is an air traffic controller. So if you know
Okay.
anything about that career, it's rated as like the most stressful career.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a different schedule every day. So he works like 3 nights a week, and once a week he works overnight. So he has to sleep during the day. So, we're blessed that he has that career,
Yeah.
but it comes with a lot of evenings that there's not help. And that's when both kids are home, after school and stuff like that. So that's where I think this idea of, which you could probably speak to where it came from, that we're coaching parents to do it at home. I don't know if it came out of COVID, but I just feel it's so flawed.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I've had, EI say, well, we're teaching you to just work it into your normal day, right? But like I've told other therapists, I cannot follow my son around for 12 hours a day that he's awake and pull this engagement out of him.
Yep.
It's not possible, nor is that healthy for his mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And I have other people to take care of and a home to take care of. And I do work. I worked for Paper Pie. It used to be Usborne Books and More for those 6 years. And I've been a director for 3 years with them. So I do have to find time to do that. So this idea that we're just going to go to an office once a week to meet an SLP or OT for maybe only 30 minutes, and sometimes it's not once a week. And then you're going to put it on me to do it all myself at home. I'm in a caregiver support group, and someone who her husband had a motorcycle accident. So he has all these reasons for his therapies that are not autism. But she last week said to me, I just feel like the OT, the speech, the PT, they keep telling me, we're trying to get him home and teach you how to do this at home. And she said, all you're doing is putting hat and hat and hat and hat on top of my head. And now I'm like the Mad Hatter. I have too many hats and I can't do it all. So I don't know. I understand parents need to learn, and I want to learn. I went and got DIR floor time trained myself. I want to learn. I do. But please stop putting this pressure on me. It's too much.
Yeah. That's such a good point. And I don't love the term coaching in general because it gives this idea of like coaches are in charge of the team. Like coaches are, it gives this perspective of like, I don't like being deemed as like the coach. And I think we need to look at it differently. I look at it in a way of my job first is to understand the family and the child and their dynamic and what their needs are and what their goals are. And you need to work within, we spend all this time trying to understand the child's capacity, but are we taking the time to understand the caregiver's capacity and what their needs are and where their support needs to be? Because oftentimes, when I see a caregiver and they initially come to see me, or maybe I'm the first therapist that they're seeing, I always say to them, my job now is to help you be mom or help you be dad or help you be, and that might be helping like meld some of those things in together, so because there are some caregivers that come in and then they're like, I'm struggling to connect with my child. And that's of course, a big focus of like, how can we, and floor time is such a proponent of that, of like, how can we connect and do that? But yeah, they have to be, I feel like I'm more helping them take a step back of like, you've been trying to be therapist and trying to be doctor and trying to be all these things. Now, how can we help you feel like safe in how you're engaging with your child and take some of those hats off that you've been trying to do? So, but you're right. There is such a big push of like, okay, I'm coaching you to do this so that you can do it at home. I want to, and when I say I want to like work myself out of a job, it's more so the idea that like we're comfortable with where we are and less of a like we've met all our goals or like we've gotten a child to be, where society says they want to be, which obviously we're neurodiversity affirming. That's not our goal. But I think, because it used to be, again, we had this shift from direct care to now we're coaching, but where's this middle ground that we can find where because also there is value to a child connecting with another person. Like, yes, we want to help, but there is value to that child feeling safe with another human and feeling loved by another person. And that maybe has different, every caregiver has their own individual profile, and every clinician has their own individual profile. So if that child can connect with people that have different profiles, that makes them more flexible
Yeah.
in that aspect. So I I do think that that is something that I'm glad you brought up, because I love your point too of, I can work on one thing a week. That's not one speech thing and one PT thing and one OT thing a week. We have to get out of our silos and look at the child as a whole, and work as a team, because I'll even have caregivers come in and be like, he's really making progress in his gross motor skills this week, but I'm not seeing much in feeding and language. And I'm like, that is very typical. When I see kids, shoot off in one area, I'm not expecting them to do that in every other area. That's okay.
Yeah.
And so maybe this is the day that he's thriving in his motor skills, and we just play and engage and not put pressure on any of that.
Yeah. I think in my perfect world, if you own a clinic with many clinicians and have the resources to do so, I would love for a social worker or mental health therapist team to be a part of that and be providing like once a month check-ins with parents. But also, I have been advocating for our own providers to start using those billing codes that are for parent
Yes.
support that just started in 2024. And I feel like I'm getting blank stares back at me. But when I'm only seeing my speech therapist for 30 minutes a week, I kind of need my own time with you, because
Mhm.
planning when it comes to Gestalt language learners,
Yeah. Yeah.
that AAC piece, it's going to be unique to every single kid. So I feel like I really need time with just you to sit down and can we look at this device and plan out where we're going to put these phrases and these video clips and
Mhm.
whatever, because otherwise I'm doing it on my own and I'm probably might make some mistakes. So in the past, I've paid to meet with Emily Diaz.
Yes.
She's a
Mhm.
she was a friend
Yep.
of mine before she got into all of her private stuff. So I'm putting that on myself and finding other people, because you at your clinic won't provide that, even though there are now billing codes for that.
Right. Yeah, and I know that, like, and this is something I will say, this is just a call to action for speech pathologists in general. There's a whole, a lot of people are having discussions about ASHA, our head organization.
Yeah.
The thing that clinicians don't understand is that your state advocates for these insurance codes. So ASHA may have advocated for this in general. You have to go to your state to advocate, because every state insurance is different. And
Mm,
so if you are questioning about these codes, that's when clinicians need to work with their state organization to advocate for making sure that insurance covers them. And sometimes the way you get insurance to cover them is you bill them, and then they either accept it or don't. And if they don't accept it, that gives you almost like a way to implement it. You
yeah.
have to try. But that is so, an AAC is so much extra time. Yes, because you're programming, your problems, it's so much problem solving, because you're essentially creating this space for all the things you think your child might want to say. And
Yeah.
that is not, like, that's hard.
I know it's so hard. And we've been on the journey for a long time. And Caden has a lot of visual processing differences, a lot of fine motor delays. Like, it's complicated. He has a lot of high support needs. And so at one point, I was so fed up last year, I actually quit speech therapy. I said, I need a break. I'm so
Mhm.
tired of like, I only get 30 minutes with you. At least 15 to 20, we're regulating ourselves
Right.
to transition
I
into
can't
this
imagine
place.
30. I do, and I could not imagine 30 minutes.
Well, I'm told that that's like what our state is
Mm-hmm.
building for, but I can tell you as parents, like I will say that I have a wonderful team, but each team is they're kind of confined to what their
Yeah.
clinic allows them to do. And we are a part of two different clinics, and I've had one clinic like when what you're saying is let them deny it, and then maybe you have to appeal it, and then you start fighting. One clinic who's kind of like, oh, well, appeals never work, and staring at me blankly when I'm asking for their help to appeal. And this other clinic saying, I literally am doing appeals like every week as a part of my job. What OT and SLP is not doing appeals for you, Brooke?
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
should be doing that, you know? So you as a parent really need to understand that there are options out there. And maybe that's
Yeah.
coming from a place of privilege that I have access to these things. I don't live in a rural place, but I
Mm-hmm.
also, when I lived in Ohio, we drove an hour to Columbus for speech therapy that I paid out of pocket for. Again, that comes from privilege, but man. Oh, I know. I have a friend. I'll tell you this. She's in a very rural place. I want to say in Missouri.
Okay.
And because of that, she is amazing. And she has worked with the state through whatever case manager she gets through her insurance
Mm-hmm.
to pay for her as the parent to get DIR floor time trained because there are none there where she is.
Yeah.
And all these other programs, like because there's nothing there,
Yeah.
she is finding ways to get like, oh, we have this family member that we could train her, and they're appealing to insurance to pay for these things. So you can be resourceful,
Wow. Yeah.
you know.
Insurance, there are so many resources that insurance, I think, doesn't want you to know that are available,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And I think it is finding people who, and there are so many organizations that are trying to help. It's just
Hmm.
sometimes really hard to find them. And so
Yeah.
finding people in the community that have been through it or know these supports is is challenging, but that's where, and I will say as the clinician, like there are a lot of things, excuse me, are a lot of extra work. But
Hmm.
that's why I got into this job, to support families, not to, I didn't get into this job because of, how much money it pays us. That's not.
Yeah.
But
Sometimes you can
yeah,
always tell. You can meet people that you're like, okay, maybe you're burnt out, but still here for the money. I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say, can you speak a little bit to your journey of like finding the right therapist? Like, I think we have a lot of, and you and I have this talked a little bit before where, I have families that I meet that I sometimes know I'm not the right fit. And
Yeah.
whether it's for the what they want or the part of the journey that they're on, sometimes I call myself the seed planter. Like sometimes I just plant a little seed. Like we talk about certain, techniques or ideals, and maybe they're not ready, and that's totally okay. And
Yeah.
then, usually I get to a point where like I want them to come to the conclusion, because I don't want, even though I know I'm not the right fit, I don't want them to feel like somebody else left them.
Yeah.
I want them to make those choices, because it's hard enough, it's hard enough finding support and people to work with your child. And I also don't want a caregiver to ever feel like their child was too much. And that's because I have so many caregivers that come in and it breaks my heart and they just say, I'm sorry, the whole session. I'm
Yeah.
sorry he's having a hard day. I'm sorry this, I'm sorry that. And I make a rule in my session, like, you're not allowed to apologize for you or your child, because I'm here to support, like, and I imagine if they're apologizing to me, like how much during the day do they feel the need to apologize for, like, if they need extra support when you're in the grocery store, or like, I
Yeah.
just, it breaks my heart because I don't think they have anything to apologize for, but that's a thing they're grappling with, obviously.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think most times we're probably seeing moms, and we know that I'm very guilty. I think like in 11th grade, I had a very role model woman teacher just tell me, stop apologizing every time I call on you. I'm so sorry I'm asking this, but what's
Mm-hmm.
X to the second power? Like, I'm so sorry to bother
Yeah.
you. I think women just
Yes.
do that. So,
That's true. That's true.
but yeah, I can relate to that. I do. So my journey on finding providers, it hasn't always, I haven't always done the best job, but I would say that whenever I'm initiating with anyone, and when you're an EI, people are kind of assigned to you, but you
Mhm.
have that case manager type person, whatever the role is called in your state. And I am always just describing what I'm looking for. And when I'm doing that, I will use the term neurodiversity affirming, but I have learned that I cannot just say like, I really take a neurodiversity affirming approach. Can you make sure to pair me with someone who does too? It's such a buzzword.
Yeah, it is.
That it's kind of like inclusion, right? Now we're going to neurodiversity affirming. Inclusion was this buzzword, and what I see people claim as inclusion is not inclusion. What I see people claim as affirming is not. And so I can say that so that they know the phrase for what I'm about to ask, but I go through a list. And I wrote it out recently on a post by Meg Thompson, behavior consultant, in one of the comments where we were talking about people like floor time bachelor's level people getting trained as developmental therapists and then and billing as RBT hours, and OTs and SLPs billing as the supervision hours as a way to like work around ABA. I don't know if that works or not, but I wrote this out in the comments of the post and I just go through. We do not want to use PECs, hand over hand, planned ignoring, using objects as a reinforcer, withholding it from them. Please don't use yourself as a reinforcer. I had a really good conversation with, I think, Nicole Casey, Connections,
Yep.
speech
Yep.
therapy recently.
She's great. Yeah.
She was trying to like defend herself to a BCBA who was telling her we all use reinforcers, and she was trying to say like, no, like I'm the reinforcer. I messaged her and I said, hey, I know this is not what you meant, but as a parent, I hate when people say that. I had a school team member one time say, I want to be like a chocolate chip cookie to your son, and he wants that chocolate chip cookie so bad, then I can now use that chocolate chip cookie to get him to do what I want.
Ooh.
And I'm like, no, right? And so I explain these scenarios
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
say, I want to know that if I'm in my house and Caden is knocking on the pantry, that you're going to take that as him communicating and open the pantry for him and get him what he wants. And you're not going to make him hand you a card, do a sign, make a sound, or push a button.
Yes. Yep.
That you're going to take total communication approach. But then I'm going to explain what total communication is. I'm not going to assume that that person knows what it is, because again, people say they do, but they don't.
Yeah.
You have to provide what you don't want, and then also explain what you do want.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So yeah, that's a big one. I think that relationship is really important. And yes, we are like a motivating person for our kids, but we are never, and I know Nicole, we talked about it. She never does this, but we don't withhold ourselves
Right.
to elicit a desired response.
Right.
So yeah, you have to be careful when you use that phrase like reinforcer and things like that.
And then how, you think about it in the way of like, it just seems cruel to connect with a child and then feel like they have to earn that when it's already challenging sometimes. Like that just, and I'm a big proponent because I think to your point of what total communication means, to some people that means, I'm acknowledging their communication, I'm giving, they can use other things, but I'm still going to, promote. I'm trying to figure. So for example, with the cabinet, some people would, I know this is what you want, but I'm gonna, like you said, expect you to, use your device or something like that. My goal with a communication device is to help them communicate things that they aren't, that maybe are more symbolic, that they don't have access to a way to communicate it right now, or they do, it's just maybe, less, maybe other communication partners don't know what they're communicating, especially with emotions and when you're getting dysregulated or when you're feeling a certain way. But like, I'll have caregivers that will say to me, he doesn't use his communication device as much at home. And I'll say, you understand him.
Yeah.
And he communicates in a way that has worked for you guys for so long already. That's okay. We often talk, like I talk less with the people I trust the most because they just get me. I over communicate with people when I'm trying to be understood. So giving caregivers permission. And to your point of the coaching, like sometimes that's not the place where he's going to use his device more. Sometimes you may just model that for him just to give him more of that exposure. But oftentimes we're using that more symbolic language in places where the other ways that we're communicating unfortunately aren't being as understood, or
Mhm.
we're just expanding our ideas and now we need, other ways to have more options. Or even like, an AAC is great where, oh, I hadn't, because a lot of kids, I do a lot of feeding therapy. They'll, caregivers will be like, they're only asking for these foods. Well, if they've only had a couple exposures to something, maybe they're just not thinking of it. Maybe you give them a device and like, oh, Bluey ate that. I want to try that. I remember Bluey eating that. Let's try it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of feeding therapy, I think I have taken so much away from Learn, Play, Thrive, the Two
Mm-hmm.
Sides of the Spectrum podcasts with
Noreen,
Marsha Dunn.
Marsha, I love her
Yeah.
so much. She's like a friend of the podcast and she
Yes.
is fantastic.
Yeah, I listened to hers and Noreen
Mm-hmm.
Hunani and our feeding therapist also listened to. Like, I just love that I have that type of team that we can listen to podcasts. But it is so powerful. I love what Marcia, she used that story about like rolling salmon into a tortilla or something. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still like wasn't okay. Or these autistic adults are coming back and saying, yeah, like there's low pressure, but you're still putting this thing in front of me
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to see it, So that's been a journey for us is Kaden does technically have a therapist who specializes in feeding. She's an OT and she's amazing, a lifesaver, but we don't always work on feeding and
Yeah.
she always asks me like how are you guys doing? Like what does it matter to you? And to
Yeah.
me, like if Kaden is eating, he eats like fruit snacks and goldfish for breakfast and
Yeah.
that's where we're at. He eats a lot of processed snack foods and he drinks Kate Farms drink as nutrition. We take vitamins, but that's something that Noreen said is like we can supplement, but
Mm-hmm.
like why are we putting this weight on food
Yeah.
when they're eating? Hey, they're eating and growing, and that's kind of the goal.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a little of our feeding journey is finding someone who will be okay if Kaden just
Yeah.
eats his
And,
processed food.
too, like it got me thinking too, because we are so understanding of a child that needs a feeding tube
Yeah,
because feeding is difficult from maybe like a medical standpoint or a feeding skill standpoint.
yeah.
Why is there such a stigma of a child that needs to drink their Kate Farms? Because
Oh.
like the way you said that just got me thinking too about that. And because I'm a very big proponent, a lot of I feel like what I do in feeding therapy, honestly, is helping the family feel understood, to be able to
Yeah.
advocate for their feeding needs, to be able to advocate for a way that feels safe for them. And then, for example, like I have kids where when they're comfortable to engage with something, it may be them sitting on the counter, right? So we
Oh, yeah.
acknowledge that,
We don't
like,
eat out of chair.
right, like we acknowledge that, like, there's different goals and different ways of working on things. And sometimes what it is like, I know this kid likes peanut butter and jelly at grandma's house. So now we're just helping the family maybe expand that gestalt memory of peanut butter and jelly at grandma's house. So maybe they can eat peanut butter and jelly at home. I know that that food is safe for them in some context. I'm just trying to help them make the food safe in other contexts to allow for flexibility for them, as
Yeah.
opposed to putting a food that like they're not going to like in front of them. And that's where I think clinicians struggle, because we have this idea that we have to like progress in a certain way. And a
Mm,
lot of our job is just being the person that understands, that can
yeah.
help a family just like be comfortable with where they are. And I
Yeah.
love that question. Does this matter to you? I love that, like, what's important, and to acknowledge, because I will always say, You cannot expect that a child or family is going to show up to your session the way that they ended the last one. So
Yeah.
much has happened. So you may ask this question, does this matter to you in one session? And the next session, it may matter or it may not, or something. So we have to keep checking in with caregivers as well as the child and
Yeah.
have to take the time to understand the caregiver also. It's not just, we get this thing in grad school of like, what type of learner are they? And by that, they mean, do you like it being written out or spoken? And that's like fine. But how about like, who are they as a person? Like, I
Yeah.
know, I learn the caregivers I work with, they're always in the session. They're like,
Yes.
and I want them to be there. I want them to see what's happening. I want them also to be able to advocate for what's happening. Like, they're my resource. Like, if a child does something that's new, I need the caregiver to help me problem solve that. Like, have you
Yeah.
seen this at home? What does this mean? Did they have a hard day? Did something happen in school that this is why they're communicating this? And then I want to know how they react to certain things. Like, are they a caregiver that needs, what's their love language? Like,
Yeah.
that's also important. I have caregivers that need more, like, they need that validation, reasonably so, because they've been told they've been doing everything wrong, or they need like, me to acts of, they need me to take something off their plate, an act of service. Like, I would love for clinicians to get a better understanding of what is the way that they feel validated and loved, because this is
Mm.
a heart-centered field. And we used to get this idea that like, I have to be professional. And like, I tell my clients I love them and I mean it because they
Yeah.
deserve to feel loved. And for a caregiver to know that you love their child also, I think, helps them realize that like their child's going to be okay. Like, just like
Yeah.
they're going to be loved by other people.
Yeah. I agree with that. I I will not understand parents not going into sessions. Now, again, my oldest is neurotypical and she's been, she sees people for different needs and she doesn't
Mm-hmm.
want me there, often.
Mm-hmm.
Because a big part of the sibling journey for me is making sure that my daughter knows that she has people too. And Kaden isn't the only one that gets to just have people. So we increase her supports, even though someone else might be like, your kid's fine. Well, therapy's not about, I think everyone can go to therapy, everyone can
100%.
benefit. So anyway, it's different. Every kid has different needs, right? But like for my non-speaking autistic child, I go into therapy. And if you have any kid with like a lot of support needs, yes, there are flaws to the parent coaching model, but you need to learn what's going on. And
Mm-hmm.
also, I'm a firm believer that a parent is the best expert on their child, right? So how are you going to like be there, exactly what you said, update and all that? And if you as a clinician have parents who consistently wait in the waiting room, I just ask you to tell them to come back. And I think that it's just because of our image in our brains of what therapy is that parents kind of sit in the waiting room. And I also think they're like, oh, I have 30 minutes, or for OT at our clinic, it's 52 minutes to like answer these texts on my phone or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I get that. Like, oh
Yeah,
my
for
gosh, I
sure.
could have a moment. But you as the clinician, this is one thing I wanted to talk about is I am like calling clinicians to stand by your values. If you're neurodiversity affirming, that's like a little, don't stand by your values if you use planned ignoring. Please
Right,
change
right,
your
right.
values, but stand by your values and speak up. And that's true if you're in a school setting and you need to speak up. And there's a way to speak up. I
Yeah.
get it. Learn how, learn the way. I know an amazing SLP who recently spoke to her district about our goal is cultural competency. And if we want to be culturally competent, that includes the autistic culture.
Yeah.
And the autism community is telling us things about education that I want to present to you and tell you. And so she's got a meeting. She's meeting them. She's going to tell them because of the way she said it, right? So there's a way to say it. But man, just get those parents back in, stick to your values and say like, no, and if you don't want to be a part of therapy with me, maybe again, maybe that's that time you say, maybe we're not the best fit because like, these are the values I have as a
Yeah.
therapist.
Yeah. And I think it opens the door. I always say anytime there's a like not conflict, but a difference in ideas of something that's going to happen, it creates an opportunity to have a conversation. So if you have a caregiver that's sitting in the waiting room and, maybe, I would really love for you to come back and see what we're doing. And, you might, there might be things you don't, maybe their last therapist made them sit in the waiting room.
Oh yeah, that
Maybe like
happens.
and I would say red flag. If you have a clinician that
100%.
does not want you in the session, that is a huge red flag. And I would question that. And that's when I would make sure you're in that session. Because
Yeah.
unfortunately, I have had families that have told me stories of things that their child went through in therapy that they weren't allowed in that was so traumatic. I
Mm-hmm.
had a child I worked with that they strapped him to a bed to work on sensory exposure.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, and bless his heart, when he came into the session, he was so anxious.
Yeah.
And I said I was like, you know what? And you know what we had to do? We had to work through that trauma.
Oh yeah.
Understandably so. Like we had to spend, and
Yeah.
it's so interesting. One of my friends had a really negative relationship prior to her husband. And she always says that her husband has to kind of take the sins of the men before him, is what she says.
Yeah.
And I feel like as clinicians, we have to acknowledge that we also may, have to help families heal while they're
Mhm.
with us. And I always use the metaphor of a tree for the kids that I work with, where, you know, they are who they are. Like, I can't turn an apple tree into a cherry tree. What I can do is help them thrive and see the fruits of who they are, because those roots are who they are. And the rings of the tree are their trauma and their experiences, but we don't necessarily get to see those.
Yeah.
Caregivers may, but I'm going to assume that they're there. I'm going to assume that they've had these past experiences and treat them accordingly. Like that's, but you have to, as a clinician, just work to understand that family and what they've gone through in those experiences. No, they may not tell you, and that's
Mhm.
okay. But it's not just about making the child feel safe. It's about helping the caregiver feel safe within that context and within your
Yeah.
therapy.
Yeah, that is really huge. I mean, even you asked me before about how do you find the right clinicians, and I said I haven't always, done the best. And when you're new to this, you're kind of like you take what you can get.
Yeah.
So yeah, Caden had one of his first speech therapists, like Caden loves to move, and she just couldn't figure out like, how do I work with a kid that moves? This is how I found Jessie Ginsburg, and then like her story
Yep.
is very similar. When her back in the day supervisor was like mad at her when her kid was standing on the table.
Uh-huh.
She was so excited, because he was producing communication. But so she would find this way to like let him do a circle and then stop him, physically stop him, and make him hit a button that said go to be allowed to go again and things like that. And I didn't know any better back then.
Right.
And
Right.
I sometimes think like when we introduced AAC, does this have this traumatic memory
Mm-hmm.
associated with like holding the screen in front of the kiddo? So we've been on our journey a long time now that I don't think Caden at this point, I think he's
Yeah.
kind of over that, but that's always been in the back of my head for sure.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to caregivers that have that? Because, we know better, we do better. But what
Yeah.
would you say to caregivers that may go through that experience where maybe, they were working with a clinician or they were doing something and then they come to the realization of like, oh my goodness, I
Mm-hmm.
think this may have been traumatic. Like that's a lot of guilt, I feel, to kind of just work through. But granted, I mean, I have a lot of caregivers that come to me and they've been force feeding, but it was their child doesn't have a feeding tube. Like it was literally their only option and they just didn't have the support.
Yeah. Yeah. What do I say? Man, I think that this is where the fighter in me comes. I think what maybe helps me feel better is the advocacy afterwards. And so if you've like experienced it, I think it's okay to like, I'm someone who I'm going to send you an email and I'm going to do it nicely, but I'm going to explain, I'm going to provide resources where you can learn better to be able to do better. I'm going to provide the research, but I think that helps me feel like I've left my mark,
Yeah.
that I've provided their opportunity to do better. And now it's on them. Um, the guilt, I haven't thought about that much other than like, I kind of just provide better
Yeah.
resources and move on. Like recently, we were talking before we recorded today about a therapist wanting me to take away screen time from Kate, and he was adamant about all this research on the harms and blah blah blah, which it exists. I get it. But what I did is I sent an email explaining that we are going to stop therapy with this person, and I provided why the research that he was talking about was not research I was going to listen to because it didn't include autistic voices. I explained why it's so important to listen to autistic voices, not just like researchers in their lab coats
Yep.
taking observable data on people that don't have a say. And then I provided research with autistic voices, right? And so I provide what I'm saying that therapist should listen to instead. And then that's that. We don't need to continue. I don't need to feel guilty.
Yep.
We're all on a learning journey.
Yeah.
We all have moments in our childhood where our parents made mistakes,
For sure. For sure.
Just move forward and know that you left your mark.
Yeah. And there's a big push because I think where I get pushback a lot in my field is from the evidence perspective. And the difficult part is I think there was this idea that quantitative, you know, quantitative research that was the most valuable because it was the most structured and it had the most statistical significance, and that's what we're looking at as like the highest value. But we need to shift to people's perspectives and experiences, and what they're telling us is just as valuable, I think more so. And so I think the hierarchy idea also needs to change, because who cares if evidence says if you do this really structured protocol, it fixes. And this was when we had Meg Proctor from Learn, Play, Thrive on the podcast, when she said this too. She's like, if the outcomes of the study are to make a child more neurotypical, throw the study out. Who cares? Like, that's not what you're trying to do. So yeah, you have this evidence in quotes for doing something, but that's not what our value is. And we're going into more individualized therapy. That's so difficult to do research on. And so that's where our field really, I think, needs to change their perspective. And that's where clinicians, I think, need to learn to be more confident in themselves and their values. Like, I talk to clinicians about, like, like you said, what are your core values of what matters? And taking a neurodiversity affirming approach, like, what are the core values to that? And is what you're doing in alignment with that? If it's not, we need to take a step back. Like the course I'm doing, are we looking at these philosophies that are trauma informed and neurodiversity affirming? And if they don't align, we need to do something different. But that's where our field, I think, does really need to move away from, because evidence-based practice, it's like down our throats.
Yeah.
And yes, I think there's some techniques where people are doing things that are causing harm. And I won't go into it's a whole other thing, but they're saying that, evidence hasn't caught up with it. That's a different argument. But I think where we need to start to do is making the foundation of what we do, the family and the client, instead of the foundation being, what does this quantitative evidence say?
It's funny you said, like, we won't go there, but I was thinking about going there because when you say we as clinicians, I know that we're speaking to a lot of SLPs and CODAs and
Yep.
OTs. But I just have to give a shout out. There are BCBAs and RBTs listening
Mhm.
and working to change. And we, not me, you as clinicians
I
do
was
have,
talking tongue ties. We can go to the
yeah,
ABA stuff. I was
yeah.
talking, we're not going to the tongue tie
Oh,
realm.
oh, tongue ties.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a whole other. Yeah, we can
Yeah.
touch on this.
So, like I said, we don't have the other supports. And I'm
Yes.
sometimes in a situation where if I did need to work outside the home, the daycares, they require me to have a one-on-one. Where am I going to get a one-on-one? Through ABA, RBT, right?
Mhm.
So it's an immense amount of privilege for me to have chosen not to do ABA over the last 2.5 years. But I'm very worried about the public school system. And
Right.
I'm still not sure that homeschooling's for me. We'll see. But there is a part of, well, if my kid already has an RBT that goes with them to school, I now have someone to protect them in that school
Yeah.
system.
Yep.
That's on my mind too, right? And what I have seen is that there are some that are like absolutely just billing RBT, right? But they're not really doing those things.
Mhm.
And I am, gosh, if you followed my journey, I am like so outspoken against ABA. But what I'm starting to realize is, again, it's a privilege that I can be outspoken and I can't speak
Yeah.
for all these families. But what I ask families and clinicians to do is, again, write down what you don't want, write down what you do want, because I will admit I have called all of our ABA centers and I've spoken to the clinical directors and said, this is what I don't want, this is what I would want. Would you be able to provide that? And would you be able to learn from my current SLPs, OTs, and PTs
Yeah.
who are all DIR floor time trained? Would you be willing to learn? And out of all the centers, there's one that said they would. Others told me, well, we only know by the book ABA, or we don't like feel confident in our BCBAs. They're too new, or whatever it is. So one, now that's like a 2-year wait list, whatever. But as clinicians, there's a practice in our town that doesn't let RBTs into her clinic because it's such a strong value. But what are you doing to the parents when you're not
Mhm.
willing to help train their RBTs in better ways?
Yeah,
And yet, in an ideal world, I would love
for
for
sure.
parents to have more choices, that ABA wouldn't be their only choice. But today, with my child, this is my option. And I want to wait for the future, but my child only has 18 years as a child.
Yeah.
So I think that that is a big topic that it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. And the thing I will say, because it can, I imagine, be very frustrating when you're hearing all these, you learn about all these things that we shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
But then where's my support for what we should be doing? Because, floor time is very much expanding, but it's not expanding at the rate that children need it.
And some floor
Where,
time therapists are just
yes,
as bad. Like,
yes,
let's be
yes,
honest.
yes. And so it's this balance for me. I struggle because, I'll say to people, the whole new ABA it's still ABA. And what it does, even if you do get an RBT that's like, really shifting, has been trained, like that's what that caregiver needs. It's difficult that they're called an RBT because then it insinuates that this is something that other caregiver,
Mm,
it encourages that where they're not necessarily going to find that same RBT that's doing some things a
yes.
little more nuanced. But at the same time, us as clinicians then have to advocate for other supports, which is why I'm a part of a lot of these committees of DIR floor time that are advocating for insurance to cover it. Because
Yeah.
what else are caregivers supposed to do? So you have to work within what the resources are right now while also advocating for there to be other resources. So that's a difficult thing as a clinician, but that's when it's so individualized to this family. You're saying, this is what I need. I need someone to advocate for him. Well, then I'm going to do my best as a speech therapist to make sure that they're implementing what we've been talking about. Like,
Yeah.
that's where we are.
And I often wish like, oh, I wish I could go back and get a speech degree, an OT degree, a special
Yeah.
education degree, and just like blow everyone out of the water because I feel like I put a lot of weight. I tell people, don't put pressure on me, but I know I'm putting a lot of pressure on
Mhm.
clinicians. I'm sorry. But I do think that if you can, if it's in your ability, please maybe just consider finding a way to support families at home. Like
Mhm.
our one clinic just will not come to our home for feeding. That's immensely hard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So they will not come, the boss will not let them come. And when I showed the thread from Meg Thompson's post the other day about, well, what we did is we took bachelor's level, like human service people, we trained them in floor time. We made sure they had whatever credentials it was to be able to bill as an RBT. We called them developmental therapists. We staffed one BCBA so that we had someone who could sign off if needed, but the rest of the supervision stuff was by SLPs, OTs. I sent that to another clinic and they're like, oh my gosh,
Mm.
and trying to figure out, oh, could we maybe do this? So if that's in your power to figure that out, like get families involved, call your insurance. Could we do that? Whatever.
Yeah.
I just encourage you to maybe try it. Or could you send your clinicians out, even if it is 1 hour a week? Could you please come to my home? Because that
Mhm.
is where, for some people, we need the most brainstorming and support. And doing it, say, like, I know people say, well, do a virtual session. Heck to the no.
Yeah.
It's not going to work for me and my family. That's not the
Mhm.
one-all solution for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just being comfortable thinking outside the box too, and being
Yeah.
comfortable with like, and it's a lot of work. Like I tell clinicians, like when you start down this journey, like it's a lot of brain power. It's very emotional. It's very like, and that's when you also need to find, if you're working like a clinic that also supports your mental health and your needs
Yes.
and isn't like, I mean, seeing 10 kids a day,
No.
it's a lot. And I understand that we don't get paid a lot by insurance. And there's so many things that need to fix within the system. But when you're on that journey, having that support system and having people that you can talk to and brainstorm and feel safe with is really important. And I just wanted to touch quick on the sibling piece because when you were talking about that, I did home health for like the first 3-4 years of my career. And I would make an effort. I remember one family specifically where I saw 2 of the children in the home and they had 4 other children, all
Wow.
medically complex, that they had all fostered and adopted. They were wonderful. And when I walked in the home, I would say hi to every single one of them. And I would make sure that like I took a little time to kind of just give one of the siblings, like whether they came in while we were playing or like, I remember one of the older sons loved to like fix the plate or help with like the meal prep or making sure that you help them feel seen too, because as a child, you don't wait, why does my sibling get all these people that come and get to play with them? And like, I don't
Oh,
have
yeah.
anybody that comes and plays with me. That's hard.
Yeah. It's a big factor. And thankfully, like, well, I guess not thankfully, but since therapy is outside of the home now and it's kind of
Yeah.
during the day, my oldest doesn't always see all of it, but I think that's a big piece. So if I could just like make sure that whoever's listening gets from this episode is helping the parents increase their support system. And I want to just describe how our original EI therapists helped us do that. So when we talk about the sibling experience, one of the best ways that we could support my oldest was to get our family home
Mhm.
where she had her nana and her aunt and her whatever, and my brother lives in Vermont, but they're such a good support too. The location that was the most supportive was for me to come home. And we started brainstorming like my therapists were brainstorming with me how to get me out of their services, out of Ohio,
Mhm.
back home. And that's what they did for me. They wrote letters, which because my husband's a federal employee, like we had to go through that process. We couldn't just say like, let's get
Right.
him to apply somewhere else or whatever. So there were letters written by my own doctor, by Caden's doctors, like all of his therapists, which we had outpatient and EI, all about the importance of getting this family to their family, and not just for Caden, but for me. And so the most impactful thing that was written, in my opinion, was about, like, Brooke is at risk for major depressive disorder and suicide if we don't get her home. And I know they were trying to exaggerate to really get us home, but like that hit me like, oh my gosh, the caregivers are at such risk. And the doctors cited research. We
Yeah.
love hate with research,
Right.
but it's true. Like the depression and the loneliness and stuff. So I know that that's not an option for everyone. Not everyone has family to help them. And some people have to create their own family, but
Yeah.
whatever you can do, like there needs to be session time. Maybe use that parent coaching code, not with the kid, to talk about like, is there anything I can do to help you? And the clinicians, like, make sure you know about the community resources. We have an amazing nonprofit in our area called Neurodiverse Network. Not everyone knows about it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
amazing resource, know about the different programs all around. And sometimes when I tell clinicians about it, they're like, that exists, and I'm like, why did I have to find it?
Yeah.
So help them, even if it's an online group or whatever it is. Like, we need to increase the feeling of support for caregivers if you want them to be a part of that therapeutic team, because there are days where if like I feel just a down day, too much pressure, or I don't have help that day or whatever it is, like sometimes I will just lay down and I like can't function, So getting that increased support, really, if you can employ a social worker or a therapist at your clinic to help families do that. I think that the family well-being, the parent and the caregiver's well-being is probably the biggest determinant of progress for your kids that you
Yeah.
actually see. That makes sense.
No, I talked with somebody on an episode a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about just community.
Yeah.
Like, how do you build, and community looks so different. Community can be the community I'm creating in our session of the three of us, or it can be the community of family or the community of other caregivers. Like, we weren't meant to raise kids on our own to begin with.
Yeah, I listened to that and it's impacted me. Like we have this push to let's make kids independent. Well, I just want my daughter, this is what that person said, to be autonomous, because like I don't live alone. I sought out a partner and I live with him, and all of us are going to be disabled at some point. I'm noticing this in my caregiver group with these older women who are caring for their husbands. Like we were not meant to live alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that.
Well, I could probably talk to you forever. I really, really love this conversation. I think, and this is what I will say to clinicians too, like, talk to your caregivers, like, have these conversations, hear what they're telling you, and you're going to learn, and it will make you better for the next family that you work with. And that's what I want people to take away too, is like, how, again, support. How am I supporting the families I'm working with? And how am I also getting outside of the box of what my scope is, or whatever you want to call, like, this is in our scope. This is what we're supposed to be doing. We're humans working with humans.
Yeah.
And we have to make it less medical and just really get back to the heart of it, I think.
True. And even if that means like bringing up the parent going and finding her own therapist, like that's okay too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love talking with you too. It's so
I know.
fun forever.
Is there anything we missed? Is there anything else you would love to leave any people with?
Oh my gosh. Yes. So my son is coming home from the park in about 5 minutes, but I did want to say we didn't get to talk much about IEPs.
Oh, yes.
But the biggest thing that I want to tell parents is you might not be made to feel this way, but you are the most important voice at that initial IEP table. You and your voice has the most power at that initial IEP table. After that, once there's a signed IEP, sometimes some states have rules they don't even have to update parents when they change the IEP. Like, it's bad.
Oh,
But hopefully, I don't think I'm in a state like that, but I want you to know you're the most important voice. You do not have to agree. You are entitled to as many IEP meetings as you want, continuations until you agree. Look into, like, if your county has free advocates. Our county does. So sorry. Maybe do some fundraising. I know it's like a privilege to be loud, but really, like, if you teach yourself to be an advocate, just learn a few terms. I don't know everything. I learn a few terms and I spout them out, and that helps me. And yeah, say no. Like,
yeah.
my best question that really helped Caden get what he has right now is I kept asking, what other options are there? I don't agree to that. What other options are there? And I was in a standstill for like 2 hours one time. And I just kept saying it. I probably said it 20 times. I'm not going to agree to that. What other options are there? Okay, we'll table it and talk about it later. As if by the end of the meeting I would agree. But by the end, no, I still didn't. And I got what I wanted at the end. So, and you're a
Yeah.
team. Like, hopefully you're working as a team. Hopefully you don't have to argue. But please just know, do not let someone make you feel like you have to accept what they say. Don't let them say, oh, we can't do that. It's individualized, right? So anyway, I'm really passionate about IEPs as well. So I just wanted to say that before we end.
Yeah, we should do. Maybe I'll have you back on and we can talk more about that because I feel like that's just like a big topic in and of itself. And that transition is so difficult for so many families because the schools, it's just, and so overwhelming. And I will say too, I'm present in a lot of my clients' IEP meetings. Like they'll ask to bring me on so I can also advocate for what their needs are too and be another voice on the side of the caregiver because it can be
Yes.
really, really overwhelming having all those people
And it's
that,
just,
yeah,
and that's what I'll say too. Like, I'm not a paid advocate or anything, but I've had friends who, like, their husbands can't make it during the day or whatever. The timing of IEP meetings is a hard thing.
yeah,
So they've just asked me, and I tell the team, I'm here as a support person because there's 9 of you and 1 of her, and I don't
yeah,
want her to be alone. And I'm just a friend. You can do that. You can
yep,
invite anyone you want, your aunt, your friend, let them come with you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We'll have to have you back on. I would love to. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Erin.
Do you we always Michelle likes to ask if anybody's got any love money, as she calls it. Is there an organization that you would like people to donate? And then also where can people find you if they want to like learn more about your story
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram. It's just at Brooke Nutting, I think, or underscore. Gosh, that's really bad. Just search Brooke Nutting.
I think it's dot because I just looked
Oh,
at it.
it's
Yeah.
dot. Yeah, Brooke Nutting. Nutting, just like a peanut. I married into it. And what was the other thing? Oh, so I actually have 3 organizations. I can't
Perfect.
choose one because, like,
Yes.
it would cause,
Yeah.
bias. But I mentioned in my area, there's a nonprofit called Neurodiverse Network, and it's wonderful. Another organization that is trying to start, it's called the Pod Play Cafe,
Oh
and
yeah.
its goal is to be an inclusive play space in our area. They are signing the lease on a place like real soon,
That's awesome.
but there's a for-profit side, but there's a nonprofit side that really help. Our goal, I'm on the board of the nonprofit, is to help families fund some of the therapies because many of our clinics do not take state insurance at all because in Pennsylvania they reimburse like pennies on the dollar. So
Uh-huh.
help fund therapy and fund devices and things like that. And then the third one is called We Connect, WEE Connect. And it's supposed to be, or it is, an all-inclusive daycare for kids of all abilities, but they're increasing in size. So they're opening a second building. And it's just so nice to refer people there because so many of our kids keep getting kicked out of their daycares and preschools. They say we don't have the staff to support. And then I think I told you before that the age 3 to 5 kids in our state
Yeah.
they're not given free preschool if they have a delay. So there's nowhere else for them to go. So the fact that there's now this daycare for toddler up to preschool age is amazing. The owners are incredible. Anytime in this podcast that I have mentioned, there's this other clinic willing to work. It's their clinic that they run called Connections, Early Interventions and Supports. But We Connect is their nonprofit and
Awesome.
a daycare for all kids of all abilities. Have you heard of that or seen that? I have not, but
Yeah.
it's in my area and I'm so thankful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank y'all. We will talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
Thank you for joining us for today's course. To complete the course, you must log into your account and complete the quiz and the survey. If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete mailing address in your account profile prior to course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to reflect on your ASHA transcript. Please note that if this information is missing, we cannot submit to ASHA on your behalf. Thanks again for joining us. We hope to see you next time.
Feeding Matters guides system-wide changes by uniting caregivers, professionals, and community partners under the Pediatric Feeding Disorder Alliance. So what is this alliance? The Alliance is an open access collaborative community focused on achieving strategic goals within 3 focus areas: education, advocacy, and research. So who is the Alliance? It's you. The Alliance is open to any person passionate about improving care for children with a pediatric feeding disorder. To date, 187 professionals, caregivers, and partners have joined the Alliance. You can join today by visiting the Feeding Matters website at www.feedingmatters.org. Click on PFD Alliance tab and sign up today. Change is possible when we work together. That's a wrap, folks. Once again, thank you for listening to First Bite, fed, fun, and functional. I'm your humble but yet sassy host, Michelle Dawson, the All Things Peds SLP. This podcast is part of a course offered for continuing education through speechtherapypd.com. Please check out the website if you'd like to learn more about CEU opportunities for this episode, as well as the ones that are archived. And as always, remember, feed your mind, feed your soul, be kind, and feed those babies.